Welcome back. President Trump is just hours away from his first primetime address, where the president will unveil his long-delayed strategy for Afghanistan and ask the nation to trust his leadership on the nation's longest war. Caitlin Collins is at the White House, where the president returned last night. So, I think a lot of people forget this is the nation's longest war so far, the president's first primetime address. What are we expecting to hear tonight?
Well, we're going to hear him lay out this strategy tonight, Anderson. We don't know details, but we do know the president made a final decision on Saturday. He announced that on Twitter after he had met with his national security team at Camp David the day before. We know that he's been presented with a range of options, going from completely withdrawing from Afghanistan to even adding roughly 4,000 troops. So we're going to see what the president chooses tonight. Defense Secretary James Mattis said he was not going to give any details out. He was going to wait, let it come from the president himself tonight. He's going to make that address from Fort Myer, right outside of us here in Washington, an audience made up of military members. But this is a big moment for the president, Anderson, because this is he's essentially asking Americans to trust him with this decision about Afghanistan at a time when his leadership capability has really come under fire in the light of the comments he made about the violence in Charlottesville last week. So that's what we're going to see tonight. And if he does go the route of adding troops in Afghanistan, he's going to have to explain to the American people why he thinks that's the best choice now, because we know this is something that he railed against in the years before he became a candidate for president, Anderson.
Yeah, obviously it's very easy when you're not the president to rail against something, and then president, you get a different perspective. We'll see exactly what he says tonight. Thank you very much. I want to bring in David Chalian, CNN political director. I mean, David, for years, Donald Trump did call for a complete withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. It sounds as if he's about to pull back on that.
Yeah, speedy withdrawal. It's time to get out of Afghanistan. These were his tweets, within the last 3, 4, 5 years. And obviously, if he does indeed go before the country tonight, Anderson, and make the case for sending additional troops, he will be breaking with the position that he held in the past. But perhaps more precariously for the president, he'll be breaking fundamentally with some of the core beliefs of his most fervent supporters. Steve Bannon, who just left the White House, was one advisor inside the White House arguing against any of this increase because this is not the kind of foreign policy, sort of greater intervention that Donald Trump ran on and connected with his base of support on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Donald Trump, when he was campaigning, spoke against was the idea of nation building. And though that's not a term that's, the U.S. likes to use about what the United States have been doing in Afghanistan, that is a lot, basically, of what U.S. military has had to try to do in Afghanistan.
Yeah, he made the case time and again that the U.S. Treasury money should not be spent over there, that instead it should be spent on things like rebuilding our infrastructure over here. Those are the arguments he had made on the campaign trail throughout the entire presidential campaign. So now, the extra burden, I would say, is on the president when he goes before the American people tonight to sort of explain the rationale in a way that fits with his overall vision that he campaigned on.
One of the other difficulties he has as commander-in-chief is that his moral authority has been questioned time and time again. Not only his judgment, but his honesty has been questioned. Today, Senator Susan Collins from Maine said something that got a lot of attention. I want to play what she said.
He's already running for re-election. What happens next?
Well, it's far too early to tell now. There's a long ways between now and that point.
Do you think he will end up the party's nominee in 2020?
It's too difficult to say.
Pretty stunning for her to say it's too difficult to say that the sitting president may not be the party's nominee the next time.
I can't really think of a parallel where somebody from the president's own party, incumbent president, would have that said about them. It is stunning indeed. And you are right to point out timing here. I mean, the president just came off what may have been the worst week of his presidency in terms of this very issue of moral authority that the office brings with it being called into question, but again, by his own fellow Republicans like Senator Tim Scott. As he attempts tonight to sort of turn the page from that, he's doing so at a time asking the American people to follow him along at the most important kind of decision a president announces, sending more Americans into war, doing that at the very same time that the country has expressed concern overall in polls. Members of his own party have expressed concern that he's not living up to the stature of the office he holds.
Yeah, David Challian, appreciate it. A lot to watch for tonight. More on tonight's announcement. I want to bring in Jack Murphy. He's an 8-year Army Special Operations veteran who served in Afghanistan. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm wondering what you're looking to hear tonight, what your expectations are for what the president was.
Well, I think, unfortunately, my expectations are that he's going to announce yet another troop surge. And this is something that's been tried again and again and again. But what we learned, well over a decade ago is that surging more troops into an area doesn't mean that there's going to be more targets for them to hit. It doesn't mean that there's going to be more actionable intelligence for them to participate in or act on. So what another troop surge is going to accomplish in Afghanistan, I don't really know. I don't think anyone really understands.
So much of the focus obviously has been on training Afghan forces, and they've had success with more special units, commando units and things, which there are a number of, and most of the battles that have been fought have been by those Afghan commando units among Afghan troops I'm talking about. But just, I remember being there in May of 2002, and with Special Forces in Kabul training the Afghan National Army. And that was, that was 2002, and we're still in a position where it seems like the big focus is, well, we need to train more, these troops more. What is the difficulty with the training?
Well, I think it comes from a number of things. The primary thing I would say that the mistake we make is that we try to mirror American military forces in the foreign military forces that we train. So we try to train them along the same lines as our own force structure, our own tables of organization and equipment. When these are really tribes, they're disunified, they're fractured all over the place. And we can't necessarily train them and mold them in the same image as the U.S. military. It's going to have to be cultural specific to that country.
Yeah, I mean, because you can make the argument that, Taliban fighters don't have the level of training
They're not being trained by U.S. Special Forces.
And yet they're seeming to have successes on the battlefield.
Yeah, absolutely. And that raises some really profound questions about how we go about nation building, how we go about what we call foreign internal defense when we're training the Afghan forces. And I think we have to radically revisit these problems and use a little bit more creativity than just another troop surge.
The other problem is, there's been a lot of situations where there's Afghan National Police or the members of the Afghan Army killing American forces who are there to help train them. So, I mean, it's just the idea of sending in trainers, which in past years people would say, oh, well, this is just a training mission. It's not active combat. I mean, you're in a combat zone. Americans' lives are on the line.
Well, and that's the thing about these training missions is that we use phrases like that, like training mission, and that's more politically acceptable because it sounds safer, but really it doesn't really take into account or project or signal to the American public the inherent danger and the quagmire that we put our soldiers into. And when they're deploying year after year, and when unfortunately our young men and women are coming home in body bags, we owe them a better strategy and a better way forward.
Also, just the sheer amount of money that has been poured into Afghanistan, and there are real questions about where some of that money has gone. You see McMansions popping up in Kabul, owned by generals in the Afghan army, and you're like, how do they make that? How do they get that McMansion?
How much of it goes into graft and corruption? I remember we were paying warlords millions of dollars for gravel to line the gravel forward operating bases in. And it's outrageous, and it's insulting, and we owe our troops much better than this.
Well, I appreciate your perspective. Let's hear what the president says tonight. Jack Murphy, coming up next, not going quietly, new details emerging about the original plan for Steve Bannon's exit from the West Wing, and the bad blood he's leaving behind involving Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Back in a moment.
Tonight, House Speaker Paul Ryan faces voters in a live CNN town hall. A country divided, a party at odds, an agenda stalled. How do Trump and Ryan come back? Jake Tapper moderates the CNN Paul Ryan town hall tonight at 9:30.
Welcome back. This is the first week President Trump will work without his chief strategist in the West Wing, and a new report suggests that Steve Bannon did not go quietly after being forced to leave his post on Friday. According to the New York Times, Steve Bannon and Chief of Staff John Kelly devised an earlier plan for Bannon to depart amicably, but then they clashed over how the president should respond to Charlottesville. Then came the interview that Bannon gave to a left-leaning magazine, undercutting the administration's policy toward North Korea. Joining me now for more on this is CNN special correspondent Jimmy Gangel and CNN political analyst Karen Demergent. She's a congressional reporter for the Washington Post. This piece, I mean, there's so many fascinating details now coming out, either from Steve Bannon or from other. There's a piece saying how frustrated Bannon was with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. An aide told the New York Times he resented the days that Ivanka Trump would run in and cry on his desk.
And he apparently called them Javanka in not a nice way. Look, this is Steve Bannon unleashed. If he was bad when he was in the White House and causing trouble, he's going all out.
And that was one of the concerns always raised about him, is that if he's outside the White House, what's his take going to be?
Absolutely, and it's not going to stop. If you look at the front page of Breitbart earlier today, there was a headline: Bannon urged Trump to move U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, blocked by Kushner, Jared Kushner, who's an Orthodox Jew. I mean, it is just it is going to go on and on.
Right, and the claim was that Bannon was tougher on Palestinians than Kushner was. Karen, I mean, jokingly calling the president Archie Bunker. What does that say about their relationship?
Well, it's not exactly a term of endearment, let's say, even though a lot of people have warm feelings about the show.
Yeah,
It brings
Edith
up
Bunker was more the endearing one.
It brings up this association of a clueless, out of touch, kind of racist at times, person who just is the butt of the jokes, right? And that's a position that you don't really want to be, a person you don't want to be likened to if you're president of the United States. And so it just, I mean, maybe he was throwing these punches at will inside the White House, but clearly he's throwing them now from the outside. And they are landing on the internet in bold headlines that people are getting to read about.
Right, and I mean, I guess, is this his strategy moving forward? I mean, this is his role going to, because this was one of the concerns always about what's he going to be like outside. It seems like if he continues this, there's no telling where it could end up.
Look, in his first interview with the Weekly Standard, he said, "I'm Bannon the barbarian. I'm going to crush them." He said, "I'll go after Democrats in the White House." This is not...
Right, globalists, Democrats,
right.
Right.
I mean, at some point they had to decide, is he more of a liability inside the White House or outside the White House? And liability, I guess, is the wrong word, but more dangerous, I suppose, to the president inside or outside. And they did seem to come to the conclusion, especially after that American Prospect interview was published, where he talked pretty freely about there not really being a military option.
Right, he said there is no military option, which undercuts U.S.
Right, and that's whole, laying out strategy right there, which is a little bit different than, the discussions with reporters that they believe are going on anyway. So basically, to draw the line in the sand, which the president seems to have gone with Kelly's recommendation at that point and said no more, is a decision made on that thing, that turning in a way. I mean, and clearly they must have known to some extent that Bannon wasn't just going to go quietly into the good night, that he was going to speak his piece from outside.
But also, I'm talking about quickly speaking his piece. I mean, it wasn't even like, I'm going to take a weekend off. He was calling in apparently to the Breitbart editorial meeting away.
Within hours. And the other thing is, the same Republicans that wanted him out and have been lobbying for him to be out. My phone blew up this weekend with, he's going to tear apart the Republican Party. They are really concerned about what comes next, not just about attacks on the White House, but that he's going to go after Republicans, not only from Breitbart, but grassroots movement. Maybe he'll start a super PAC. Maybe there'll be micro-targeting. They really see a danger.
Right, or even
at
Breitbart TV. There's been
exactly, and he doesn't owe anybody anything right now is the thing, because he was so pilloried by the party and pointed to when things went wrong, like Charlottesville, that really there's very few people out there to whom he owes any allegiance. So he can call his shots right now, free from a boss telling him not to.
It's going to be fascinating, Karen. Thanks so much, Jimmy, as well. Appreciate it. I had 10 sailors lost at sea after their ship collides with another vessel in the Pacific. The latest, a string of incidents involving U.S. warships. What the Navy is doing now to make sure this doesn't happen again. The latest on this incident. Also, the head of says his
So he can call his shots right now, free from a boss telling him not to.
It's going to be fascinating, Karen. Thanks so much, Jimmy, as well. Appreciate it. I had 10 sailors lost at sea after their ship collides with another vessel in the Pacific. The latest, a string of incidents involving U.S. warships. What the Navy is doing now to make sure this doesn't happen again. The latest on this incident. Also, the head of the Secret Service. Massive search underway right now for 10 American sailors lost at sea after a collision in the Pacific between the USS John McCain and a commercial tanker. Defense official telling CNN the Navy is expected to order a 24-hour pause in activity as a safety precaution following a string of accidents here. Take a look at the hole that was punched in the side of the McCain. The Navy reports significant damage to the destroyer's hull. You can see it there with flooding in the sleeping and communications area. Today's collision marks the fourth accident for a U.S. warship in Asian waters since January. Just past June, 7 sailors were killed aboard the USS Fitzgerald after it collided with a merchant vessel off the coast of Japan. Defense Secretary Mattis spoke about the series of crashes a short time ago.
We obviously have an investigation underway, and that will determine what happened. The Chief of Naval Operations broader inquiry will look at all related incidents at sea.
Christopher Harmer is a retired U.S. Navy commander and a senior naval analyst at the Institute for the Study of War. Commander, appreciate you joining us. 4 collisions since January. I mean, this may be a dumb question, but I mean, is something going on here? Is that a large number?
It's not a dumb question. It's an accurate question. It's a question the public ought to be asking and ought to be demanding answers from the Navy. Look, I'm a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, a retired naval officer. This is embarrassing to me personally as well as professionally. Now, as a taxpayer, I'm concerned. The U.S. Navy has a huge budget. The U.S. Navy has massive responsibilities for our national security. And it appears right now that the U.S. Navy cannot conduct basic seamanship and navigation operations without running into large commercial tankers. Now, this is a big problem for the Navy, not just in terms of appearance, not just in terms of the public relations with the broader American people, but with the substance of being able to deploy ships. I get it. I've had near misses myself during my time in the Navy. Everybody knows that there's always an accident waiting to happen, but you can't have multi-billion-dollar destroyers running into commercial container ships. That's not acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, how does something like that happen?
I'll tell you exactly how it happens. It happens because of an over-reliance on technology, which leads to complacency. I'm the first person to be grateful for the fact the U.S. Navy never goes to sea, never goes into a fight without having an unfair advantage. We're the most technologically advanced Navy in the world. Unfortunately, that leads to an over-reliance on technology and an abdication of basic seamanship and navigation. What I mean by that is these are ships that have radars that can literally see into outer space. They can track everything from a cruise missile to a ballistic missile to a satellite, shoot all those things down. The crew has a tendency occasionally to get lax and forget their basic responsibilities of using their eyes and using their short-range radars to avoid collisions at sea. This is unacceptable. It happens once, twice in 2 months. The Navy has a serious problem right now and it needs to be addressed immediately.
So something like a temporary stop down for an operational pause, as they're calling it. What's the benefit of something like that?
Yeah, that's pure window dressing. Look, this is a problem that's been occurring over decades. It's built to this point. Taking a 24-hour safety stand down, yes, that's a very small step in the right direction. But the problem is if you're not attending to your basic seamanship and navigation, if you're not attending to your basic training and readiness, if Congress has forced the Navy to accept lower training and readiness funding in order to preserve procurement dollars, well, then there's no way for the Navy to solve that problem. A 24-hour stand down can begin to look at the first layer of incompetence. The real problem here is the Navy needs to rededicate itself to basic seamanship and navigation training, basic training and readiness. And if that means that we can't deploy quite as often, then we need to send that message back to Congress that we don't have adequate funding for training and readiness. We need an increase in training and readiness funding, an increased focus on basic seamanship and navigation.
Christopher Harmer, I appreciate your expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The agency in charge of protecting the president and his family says it is running out of money. The situation is so dire, the head of the Secret Service says it cannot afford to pay its agents to continue protecting the Trump family. USA Today first reported this. The director of the U.S. Secret Service says more than 1,000 agents have already maxed out salary and overtime that was supposed to cover the entire year. The size of the president's family, the volume of travel apparently draining the Secret Service budget. The president obviously has multiple homes in multiple states. He's taken trips almost every weekend of this presidency so far to his golf courses. He's not alone. 18 other Trump family members get protection as well. A short time ago, the Secret Service issued a statement downplaying the Trump family's role in the budget crunch, saying that funding being a problem it's been a problem for a decade now due to an increase in operational tempo. That was their words. Here to discuss this is CNN law enforcement analyst Jonathan Wackrow, who's a former Secret Service agent. Jonathan, is this just something that happens every year, or is it specific? Is it amplified because of the number of protectees in the Trump family and also the amount of travel he's playing golf a lot?
Well, the pay cap has always been a problem for the service.
There's a pay cap for what?
For agents. They only can make a certain amount of money with their base salary, law enforcement availability pay, and overtime pay, they only can max out at a certain level, and that's based upon seniority, and it's based upon law.
So the seniority, the folks who have the most seniority are the ones protecting the closest to the presidential family.
So what you have right now, Anderson, is you have the perfect storm. You have a problem that's been consistent with the Secret Service year over year, which is the pay cap, and you have a president that is traveling significantly. And you have a shortage of your available manpower. The numbers of the Secret Service, the retention rate has been going down. The available agents that can work are going down.
So the more travel the president does, the more travel, the more members of his family there are to protect. That's the more overtime for senior agents, and that's capped.
Exactly. So the statement that came out that 1,100 plus Secret Service agents, will be affected, from now until the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of September. October 1 starts the new fiscal year. 1,100 agents are going to be financially affected by this management of manpower and resources. This is absolutely, a problem for the Secret Service. I mean, imagine morale is going to be a major issue. People are going to start working overtime hours for free. I mean, do you really want the people who are around the President of the United States to have a low morale? No. I mean, they need to be, compensated for the work that they're doing.
And also, obviously, more time, the first family is away, more time agents are away from their families, and more likely they are to want to get out because it's untenable.
Exactly. What's happening is, there's a stopgap that the Secret Service management will put into place where instead of one agent working their, a regular 8 hours plus overtime hours, to alleviate that, they'll take two agents. And now you have an operational deficiency where you're taking two agents to do what one agent should be doing in the course of a 24-hour period. And what's missing in all of this, in the reporting, is that there's going to be a lapse in the investigative responsibility. Remember, the Secret Service is a dual mission entity. Protection and investigations. Investigations will come to an absolute standstill because of this,
It's not just a protection detail. It's working with the Treasury Department. And
exactly. Remember, this affects the organization as a whole.
Jonathan Wacker, I appreciate it.
Thanks
very much. He's been criticized for not being strong enough in rebuking President Trump on issues like Charlottesville tonight. CNN Town Hall with House Speaker Paul Ryan. Coming up next, though, this hour, we'll look at the important issues that he'll be asked about, including what's next on the Republican agenda. Back in a moment.
Tonight, House Speaker Paul Ryan faces voters in a live CNN town hall. A country divided, a party at odds, an agenda stalled. How did Trump and Ryan come back? Jake Tapper moderates the CNN Paul Ryan town hall tonight at 9:30.